Imagine, like, the largest, most complex fiber optic network on Earth.
Oh, that's a good way to picture it.
Right. Just picture a massive continent-spanning grid of cables. You've got billions of signals zipping back and forth, routing just unimaginable amounts of data every single millisecond, and doing all of that without a single drop-in connection.
Yeah, which is impressive enough on its own.
Exactly. But now, realize that you have something infinitely more complex and just brilliantly engineered sitting right inside your own pelvis.
It's true. We spend a lot of time marveling at the human brain, which, is understandable.
Sure, it's the brain. It gets all the glory.
Right, it gets all the PR. But the biological network of wiring that connects that brain to the furthest reaches of your body is just, it's a staggering feat of evolutionary engineering. We aren't just a collection of bones and muscles. We are a highly organized, electrified machine.
And today, we're mapping that biological superhighway. Our mission for this deep dive is to trace the body's electrical system, specifically focusing on the lower half of your body.
Which is a huge territory to cover.
It really is. So we're starting at a complex sorting station hidden deep in your lower back, and we're going to follow the signal all the way down to the very tips of your toes.
I love that.
Yeah. And to do this, we are pulling from some incredibly detailed anatomical guides that meticulously map out two major structures, the sacral plexus and the sciatic nerve.
Two of the most important structures in the body, honestly.
Definitely. We're going to explore how these biological cables originate, the exact courses they take through your tissues, the logic behind their branching, because there is a logic to it, and what happens when this intricate system breaks down.
Because when it breaks down, you definitely feel it.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's start at the beginning. Before a data packet can shoot across a transcontinental cable, it has to be routed through a local hub, right?
Exactly. And in the human body, for the lower extremities anyway, that hub is located on the posterior pelvic wall.
Okay, so back to the pelvis.
Right. It's safely tucked away behind your internal blood vessels and your ureter, and it's sitting right against this deep muscle called the piriformis. Anatomists call this junction the sacral plexus.
The sacral plexus. And the sources describe this plexus as a network formed by two main sets of nerve roots coming off the spine.
Yeah, so first you have the lumbosacral trunk,
which gathers fibers from the lower back, right?
Sure.
Specifically, the lumbar spinal nerves labeled L4 and L5.
You got it. And then that trunk drops down into the pelvis and meets up with the sacral spinal nerves S1 through S4 just as they emerge from the base of the spinal cord.
It really just looks like a massive convergence of wires. And I was thinking about this when reading the guides. If we compare the brain to a central power plant, I'm trying to visualize what this plexus actually does. Like, is it essentially a passive train station where the tracks just happen to cross? Or
Oh, no, it's very active.
So something more active is happening in that space.
Oh, definitely. Think of it much more like a highly active train marshalling yard. The sacral plexus doesn't just, let these nerve fibers pass straight through.
It's not just a conduit.
Right. It takes these raw, thick bundles of spinal nerves coming down from the brain, and it meticulously unweaves them.
Wow.
Yeah. It sorts the individual microscopic fibers, shuffling them around and repackaging them into anterior and posterior divisions. So, for example, fibers that came from the L4 vertebra might be braided together with fibers from S2, and then they're bundled for highly specific shared destinations.
But why go through all that trouble? I mean, why not just have one nerve go straight from the spine to the knee, and another go straight to the foot? It seems like a lot of extra work.
Well, evolution favors redundancy, especially for structures that are critical to your survival.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right. So by mixing and matching fibers from multiple different spinal roots at this marshalling yard to form new specialized nerves, the body is basically creating a failsafe.
Backup system.
Exactly. Imagine our ancestors out in the wild. If a single injury occurs at one specific nerve root at the spine, say, you get a compressed disc at L5 or some kind of localized trauma, you don't necessarily lose the entire function of a leg or, an organ system.
Because the leg isn't just relying on that one L5 wire.
Precisely. Because the leg is receiving a bundled cable that contains backup fibers from L4, S1, and S2 as well. So that careful sorting protects your overall ability to run, move, and basically survive.
That is so smart. Okay, so we have this brilliant fail-safe sorting facility in the pelvis, and the anatomical guides show these freshly sorted bundles, then heading out to power wildly different systems.
Oh yeah, they go everywhere.
Right, the destinations aren't just a straight shot down the leg. We're talking about fibers going to heavy leg muscles, but also fibers heading to internal organs. How does the body organize which cables go where?
So the physical sorting usually dictates the destination. The sacral plexus generally divides its output into posterior branches, anterior branches, and then one massive terminal branch.
Let's start with the posterior branches.
Sure. So the posterior branches, the cables routed toward the back, are predominantly focused on the heavy machinery of movement. For instance, they form the superior and inferior gluteal nerves.
And the sources note these gluteal nerves power the tensor fasciae latae, the gluteus medius, minimus, and the massive gluteus maximus.
Which is a huge muscle.
Yeah, these are the powerhouse muscles we rely on for walking, running, and basically keeping our hips stable when we stand on one leg.
Exactly. Those posterior branches are fundamental to human bipedalism. You literally couldn't walk without them. But then when we look at the anterior branches, the ones routed toward the front and the pelvic floor, the function shifts entirely.
It's a completely different job.
Right. We leave the realm of heavy mechanical lifting and we enter the world of vital autonomic and sensory functions.
Which the guides highlight the pelvic splanchnic nerves here. These originate from the S2, S3, and S4 spinal roots, and they control systems that largely operate without our conscious thought. Right?
Yeah, those nerves provide parasympathetic and motor control to the deep pelvic cavity, so they manage the smooth muscle of the bladder, which is what allows you to store and release urine.
Crucial stuff.
Very. They also control the distal part of the large intestine, helping to regulate digestion and elimination, and they even manage the blood flow required for physical arousal, so they play a direct role in clitoral and penile erections.
And we also have the pudendal nerve running right alongside them, which the guides emphasize as incredibly important for daily function.
Oh, the pudendal nerve is fascinating. It blends motor control and sensation in a highly sensitive area. It snakes down around a ligament in the pelvis and it manages the external anal sphincter,
giving you voluntary control over your bowel movements.
Exactly. Plus, it provides sensation to the skin of the perineum, the posterior scrotum or vulva, and it powers the subtle muscles of the pelvic floor that support all your internal organs. It does a lot.
It really does. But, reading through the comprehensive list in the source material, the sheer volume of specific branches, the Latin names, the distinct physiological destinations, it feels completely overwhelming.
I remember that feeling well.
Right. I mean, medical students must look at this tangled web of fibers, ranging from the massive gluteus maximus to the delicate muscles of the bladder, and just wonder how to even begin making sense of the chaos.
It is intimidating, but anatomy is ultimately mastered by finding order in that chaos. It's about recognizing the underlying logic of the body. When medical students first encounter the sacral plexus, they rely heavily on mnemonics.
To memorize it all.
Not just to memorize, actually, but to categorize the branches by function and location.
And the guides mention a few of these tools. Like, there's one called SIPPS. SIPPS.
Yeah, SIPPS is a classic pattern recognition tool. It stands for the superior gluteal nerve, inferior gluteal nerve, posterior cutaneous nerve of the thigh, pudendal nerve, and the sciatic nerve.
Using a checklist like that definitely makes the geography a bit more manageable. It sort of groups the major players together.
Yeah.
And the guides also mention the 6 Ps for another cluster of branches.
Right, the 6 Ps. That gathers the nerves to the piriformis, the posterior cutaneous nerve of the thigh, the perforating cutaneous nerve, the pudendal nerve, the perineal branch, and the pelvic splanchnic nerves.
Oh, that's a tongue twister.
It is. But by grouping them like that, anatomists can visualize the web in layers, rather than just this disorganized tangle of wires.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So while the sacral plexus sends out all these specialized local wires for the glutes, the gut, the bladder, and the pelvic floor, the guides make it very clear that the plexus has one main act.
The main event.
Yeah, the main event. It takes the vast majority of its remaining fibers and bundles them into a singular, colossal cable that leaves the pelvis entirely.
And that terminal branch is the sciatic nerve, the grand highway of the lower body.
The grand highway. The source data really emphasizes its sheer scale.
Yeah.
It is the single largest nerve in the entire human body.
Right.
It pulls from almost the entire length of the lower spine, gathering fibers from L4 all the way down through S3.
Its physical diameter can be as thick as an adult thumb in some places.
A thumb. That's huge for a nerve.
It's massive, and to leave the protective bowl of the pelvis, this cable has to find an exit route. So it passes through what anatomists call the greater sciatic foramen.
Which sounds like a very complex structure, but the guide clarifies that a foramen is essentially just a natural escape hatch.
Yeah, or like a doorway built into the architecture of your pelvic bone.
Right. And once it slips through that bony doorway, where does it go?
Once it's out, the sciatic nerve drops down into the back of the leg. It runs deep underneath the piriformis muscle, and then travels vertically down the posterior thigh, sandwiched safely between the heavy hamstrings and the deep adductor muscles of the leg.
And as it travels down the back of the thigh, it acts as the direct power source for those heavy-duty hamstring muscles, right?
Yep, the ones we rely on every time we bend our knee, climb a flight of stairs, or hit the brakes in a car.
Okay, but there is a detail in the source material regarding this nerve's physical structure that completely got my attention.
Oh, I bet I know what it is.
The guides mention that the sciatic nerve receives something called vasa nervorum from the inferior gluteal artery.
Yes.
It literally has its own dedicated arterial blood supply.
I was reading this and thinking, is this like a massive interstate highway that's so long and wide it requires its own dedicated gas stations built right into the asphalt?
That analogy perfectly captures a fundamental biological reality that, honestly, often gets overlooked.
How so?
Well, we tend to visualize nerves as passive copper wires or just dead, inert strings carrying static electricity. But nerves are living, breathing, incredibly energy-hungry biological tissues.
So they need fuel just like a muscle does.
Tremendous amounts of fuel. To transmit a signal, a nerve cell has to constantly pump sodium and potassium ions back and forth across its membrane just to maintain an electrical charge.
That sounds exhausting. It is. At a cellular level, that pumping action requires massive amounts of ATP, the cellular energy currency, which in turn requires a constant heavy supply of oxygen and glucose.
So it needs blood.
Exactly. And because the sciatic nerve is so exceptionally thick and spans such an enormous physical distance, it can't simply rely on ambient nutrients just floating nearby in the tissue.
It's too thick for that.
Right. It requires a dedicated internal plumbing system, the vasa nervorum, pumping fresh arterial blood directly into the nerve bundle just to keep the biological cables alive and functioning.
The sheer biological cost of maintaining this network is staggering.
It really is a marvel.
So the highway travels down the thigh, fully fueled, but eventually a main interstate has to split into local roads to deliver traffic to specific neighborhoods. For the sciatic nerve, the guides show this grand divide happening right behind the knee.
Yeah, anatomists call that area the popliteal fossa, which is basically just the hollow space at the back of your knee joint.
The knee pit.
The knee pit, exactly. And as the sciatic nerve reaches the apex of this space, it typically splits into two distinct terminal branches. One is the tibial nerve, and the other is the common fibular nerve, which is sometimes referred to as the common peroneal nerve.
Okay, let's follow the first local road, the tibial nerve. It seems to just continue the straight downward trajectory of the original highway.
It does. It drops straight down through the deep posterior compartment of your lower leg. It travels under those heavy calf muscles, winding its way down to the ankle where it passes through the tarsal tunnel.
Which is a narrow space on the inside of your ankle bone, right?
Yes, exactly. And the tibial nerve is the primary motor supply for your major calf muscles, like the gastrocnemius and the soleus, which are what allow you to push off the ground when you walk.
And it doesn't just do movement, right? It also provides the sensory data for the entire sole of your foot.
Yep. Every time you feel a pebble in your shoe or, the temperature of a tile floor under your bare heel, that specific sensory data is riding the tibial nerve back up toward the knee.
That is so cool. Okay, what about the second branch?
The common fibular nerve, this one takes a much more winding route. Instead of going straight down, it courses outward, physically wrapping around the bony head of the fibula on the outside of your lower leg.
Ouch. That seems like a really vulnerable position, wrapping right around the bone, just under the skin like that.
It definitely is vulnerable, which is why it's a common site for compression injuries. But once it reaches the front of the leg, it splits again to supply the muscles that allow you to lift your foot upwards.
Which is a movement called dorsiflexion, right?
You got it. And it also covers the sensation for the outside of your shin, the top of your foot, and this is my favorite part. It provides sensory wiring to a very specific tiny patch of skin located right between your first and second toes.
Wait, really? Just that one tiny patch between the first two toes?
Just that patch. It's incredibly specific mapping.
Okay, we have to talk about what happens when this incredible highway system experiences a traffic jam. You really can't discuss the sciatic nerve without addressing sciatica.
No, you can't. It's so common.
And the source defines sciatica as the compression or irritation of this massive nerve, which results in agonizing pain starting in the buttock and radiating all the way down the leg. But here is what I'm trying to wrap my head around. The sciatic nerve is buried deep under thick layers of muscle, like the gluteus maximus and the hamstrings.
Right.
So how does a spinal issue like a problem in your lower back cause excruciating pain all the way down in your calf or on the top of your foot?
Okay. The answer lies in the mind-bending reality of how nerve cells are constructed. It's vital to understand the concept of a continuous neural pathway here. A single nerve fiber, an axon, is actually part of one single continuous biological cell.
Wait, so the physical fiber that is sensing pressure or pain in the sole of your foot
is literally the exact same unbroken microscopic thread of a cell that originates all the way up at the L4 S3 nerve roots in your lower spine.
Are you kidding me?
Nope, we're talking about a single biological cell that can be up to a meter long.
A single microscopic cell stretching 3 feet down your leg. That's insane.
It defies how we usually think about cells, right? But because it's one continuous cell, when you have a mechanical issue in your lower back, say, a herniated disc in the lumbosacral region, that bulging disc physically pinches or inflames the root of that long fiber right where it exits the spine.
Oh.
However, the brain doesn't necessarily have the geographic awareness to pinpoint the pinch at the spine.
So the brain just receives an error signal on a specific wire.
Exactly. And because that specific wire has spent your entire life reporting sensory data from your calf or your heel, the brain interprets the distress signal as originating from the end of the line.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, a physical pinch at the very beginning of the highway sends a cascade of erratic action potentials upward, which your brain translates as burning, tingling, or just agonizing pain down the foot.
So the pain is essentially a geographic misinterpretation by the brain because the cable is so unbelievably long.
That's a perfect way to describe it. It really highlights why structural issues in the lower back can have such profound debilitating effects on a person's ability to simply walk and stand comfortably.
Because the leg itself is fine.
Right, the leg muscles might be perfectly healthy, but if the transcontinental cable is pinched at the marshalling yard, the entire system downstream is compromised.
Man. We have covered a massive amount of anatomical ground today. We've traced the biological wiring of your lower half, starting from the electrical generation at the L4 to S4 spinal roots.
It's quite a journey.
It really is. We've navigated through the incredibly intricate, fail-safe sorting station of the sacral plexus, journeyed down the massive sciatic highway through the pelvis, and followed the split at the knee to control everything from the heavy hamstring muscles all the way down to that tiny specific patch of skin between your first two toes.
It is a continuous, unbroken chain of biological